Hello and welcome to the Dissidents Podcast, brought to you by the Institute for Liberal Values. This is where we talk about how we can strive for a world in which freedom and reason are at the forefront of all human society. In this week's podcast, Elizabeth Spivak and Mike Burke discuss a new report called The Corruption of the American Mind, which discusses a potential link between Qatari funding and anti-Semitic hate crimes on campuses. Okay, hello everybody. As usual, please don't forget to subscribe, like, share, and just please do one of those or even all of those really nice things because it helps us out, whether that's on Spotify or, I don't know, Facebook, Twitter, whatever. I have no idea really about social media, but if you do, and well, all I know is that sharing and subscribing and stuff helps, so please do that. That would be very kind. Okay, so today, Elizabeth and I are going to have a look at a report that had just come out from the Network Contagion Research Institute. So I know some of the people involved with this. I know Joel Finkelstein, and well, I met him a couple of times, and I know Lee Jussim, obviously, who's been on the podcast. And this report is entitled The Corruption of the American Mind, How Concealed Foreign Funding of U.S. Higher Education Predicts Erosion of Democratic Values and Anti-Semitic Incidents on Campus. So it's looking at the relationship between funding, undisclosed funding, from overseas regimes and how that has contributed to the kind of intolerance I think that you're familiar with if you're listening to this, as well as specifically and especially anti-Semitism, which we've seen unfolding, particularly after the horrible events on the 7th. So it's tying those two things together, both the anti-Semitism and this kind of hostile environment that was very clear for anybody to see, regardless of whether or not you were Jewish or had any sympathy with Jewish or Israeli interests. So we've both had a chance to read through this. Elizabeth, what were your impressions?
Well, one little kind of, I guess I have lots of things here. First of all, I want to make really clear, of course, that this is purely correlational data, right? Mm-hmm. So there's no causation that should be inferred from this, although I believe that the authors, they have their bias is clear, they don't use the word cause, but, it's implied, I think. But I think that's, I say that, in a critical way. I also think that's very typical. We've been reading lots of articles on here and that's not atypical at all. So, I also, on a podcast that's not released yet, we had you and I had a little dust up over a measure and, a measure that's, been, studied over a long period of time, many, many, many years, 25 years, shown to be reliable and valid. It's still, we still had questions about it when we were talking about it. And it's like, can we pick apart this measure? Well, we can, but it's kind of irrelevant because that's the measure that exists. And it's been shown that when people take the scale, at one point in time and take it again, they tend to score the same. That kind of thing. This study also has some problems in that they're using, for example, FBI data on hate crimes. And all you have to do is go, and I'll link it in the podcast, but you can go to US Department of Justice.gov and look at the, you can just Google, hate crime, FBI hate crime statistics, reliability and validity. There's a, how many pages is this report? 76-page report that was just released a couple of years ago about the problems with the reliability and validity of the data for hate crimes and why those problems exist. And some of them are the definition of hate crime. Some of them are that people don't report crimes that would maybe end up being hate crimes. Maybe no one was, physically hurt. And so they end up not reporting things, maybe like graffiti on a wall, they just scrub it off or something like that. Different jurisdictions have different definitions of hate crimes. So, for example, the FBI is relying upon local, so county data, state data, and different, even at the county level, they can have different descriptions of what rape is, and what a hate crime is, and that kind of thing. So I don't want to go down that, too deep, but my point is not to criticize what the authors did with the data, but to say that the data itself is inherently not so great by the FBI's own standards. So by their own admission, this data is not too great. And one thing I would say too is that they're relying on FBI, or they're relying on local jurisdictions to report to the FBI, and then the authors access the FBI data, which is available to anyone. Who would have better, most likely, who would have the money to have like someone in their office, say, to track and report hate crimes, to maybe do some field training on what a hate crime is, to maybe do some community outreach on on hate crimes? Well, that would be larger police forces, right? In metropolitan areas, perhaps areas that had larger universities. So we have a correlation here between universities and university size. That's also correlated, and the number of hate crimes, and then also the number of hate crimes reported in the communities, because they also extended it beyond to the communities. I'm just suggesting that there's some other variables here that that would likely influence the results. So so anyway, I could carry on and may interject some more, but I'll stop there for now.
And of course, I mean, we have to bring in the kind of the Will Riley into the conversation, right? How many of these are hoaxes?
Sure.
Because Will estimates that up to half of reported hate crimes, are hoaxes. So that's another variable that we're looking at.
So this report is also, it is 53 pages long, and they do a pretty good job of, they have the citations, they have the data, the data is publicly available data. So others of us, were we so inclined, could access data. They used the Foundation for Individual Rights and Education data on university complaints. So that's publicly available data. They used the FBI data. They used now this something else. Also, they used the data on this unreported money. Now, I didn't spend a crazy amount of time looking into this, but one has to wonder, like, who's not reporting $1 billion worth of money, and what makes them decide to report it later? Because the government says, "Oh, we think you have unreported money. You should, report." Again, this would be larger schools, right? Schools with names. I mean, these are, the Harvards, the Yales. I mean, again, this report, we'll link this report in the podcast notes. It's, it's out there. It's not behind a paywall or anything like that. So you can look at the schools. These would be, schools maybe that foreign students would be more likely to attend. you know, foreign students have never heard of, I don't know, where I teach, for example. Probably they've never
Mhm.
heard of it even. I'd never heard of it before I came to work here. So, or before I applied. So, where would foreign students be applying? To schools that are well known for their research, that already have, funding sources and that kind of thing. And therefore then, say I live in a Middle Eastern country and my kids, or I immigrated or whatever, my kids have gone to this great school, and I'm gonna like say, hey, if you're gonna donate to a school, maybe you should donate to this one where my kid, my kid, where people from around here have been going. These are going to be big research schools that tend to attract no little school in rural America with 2,000 students is going to have not have $1 billion of unreported funding, but $1 billion just of research
Full
funding
stop.
that just drops into their labs. So these big schools that attract foreign students, aren't they also more likely? The researchers linked this to the Students for Justice for Palestine. Well, no kidding. I mean, I'm not sure that an online school, a small school in rural America, is going to have enough students who are knowledgeable, interested, I don't know, to form a club, right? If you've only got
Mhm.
a few thousand students at your university, there's not enough students to form a club of, there's barely enough. They maybe even don't have any fraternities or sororities. They maybe don't have any sports except intramural. So I don't know. I'm finding a lot of kind of other variables here that could
Fraternity and
explain.
sorority. That's
Yeah.
such an American thing. We don't have
Oh,
them in
is
the
it?
UK.
Oh,
There's literally no such thing in the UK. Also, far as I'm
yeah.
aware, there's no such thing.
Yeah.
Um, Very
Well,
interesting.
I didn't get involved in any of that anyway, although I did go to the parties. I'm not going to lie. I definitely went to the parties. um, so to me, this report, if Lee was here, I would say to Lee, this, a little bit hypocritical, maybe it's almost a little bit implicit biasy, like the money sort of like emits something into the air and people breathe the air and then suddenly become more anti-Semitic. I'm not saying that they say that, but it's like a little like what is this money buying exactly? I wrote down this little note. I said, it's just as easy to fall in love with a rich man as it is to fall in love with a poor man. It's sort of like this old kind of saying that maybe parents would tell their daughters. It's just as easy to fall in love with a rich man as it is a poor man. It's just, it's just as easy to do research that's attractive to to funders as it is to do research that's not, maybe. So which came first, the money or the bias? Which comes first, the chicken or the egg? We have a bit of a chicken and an egg problem here.
So yeah, similarly, again, like from my point of view, and you're way more qualified than me to address this. From a methodological point of view, everything seemed to be in perfect
Right.
order,
I'm
right?
not criticizing
No,
the way they
yeah,
did
yeah,
their
yeah, yeah. No,
statistics. Not
everything seemed to
criticizing
be
that.
now. Some would I notice if it was terrible? No, probably not. That's not my thing. But it seemed to be very rigorously done, and certainly everything was very well sourced. There was no kind of we took apart. And this hasn't been released yet, but we spent like 3 hours taking apart some bizarre woke corporate presentation, and we looked at the data in that, and we just ripped it to shreds.
Right.
And then the best study that was in there, that was something that was good because it was funded by Pfizer and the rest of it. So it was, high profile rather than good, but, it did receive a lot of money. And we looked at that, and they didn't disclose their methodology or their data
Right.
sources or anything like that. So it wasn't like that. There were no kind of red flags.
Right.
My and also what they're implying is that largely Qatari funding is causing a rise in anti-Semitic hate crimes.
Right.
And I think they're probably right to imply that. But there were some bits that they didn't cover. They didn't get anybody like me involved, for example. So what I would have liked to have seen would be, okay, well, what are you funding? So is the funding being a building name?
Right.
Is it funding, I don't know, let's try Qatari Food Week on campus? See, all of those things can be perfectly benign. You know, you could get something, you could get funding from the Chinese government, right, which is a really repressive authoritarian regime, and yet that funding might be for something completely benign,
Right.
right? So you don't know. Or is the funding going into things like post-colonial studies?
Well, and there would be no way from the data that they got, of course, there would be no way to know because they're using the IRS or the, the
Not
government. Yeah. Yeah.
not from the data specifically, but you could follow that up. You could start to talk to the schools. So if they
Maybe they could. I think it would be very difficult. I do think it would be difficult. I don't want to, I agree with you completely. I do think, just like the deal with the FBI statistics on hate crime, I think it would be very difficult to tease some of this apart. But yeah, it is definitely, again, not a flaw in the way they analyze the
no,
data,
of
as you
course not.
say, but there's the data is, is not perfect. It's sort of a garbage in, garbage out kind of thing. Can we really say that, with all these different like flaws in the data, can we really say that much about, about, again, the correlations are significant. They're, the analysis seems to be fine from the way, from what we can see. So even schools or places that would accept money and not report it, my suspicion is that these are already schools, places where sort of shoddy or underhanded kinds of things are happening. These are places where people are learning that the way to get ahead is you got to beat the system, right? Like where my sister works, the professors basically get told, look, if you don't get a federal grant within the first 3 years, you're not going to get tenure. Okay. So these are people who are under extremely high pressure, particularly now as there's fewer and fewer academic jobs, and that kind of thing. So, places that are able to attract someone who wants to give this amount of money may be places where there's already some kind of like shady things going on. One of the things that this made me think of is, what if you did the same study but you tracked money that came from Jeffrey Epstein? Would you find the same thing?
No,
Because
you
would you
wouldn't.
find
Well, you
why
might find
not?
something quite different.
You might, or I don't know that you would, because it's the same kinds of schools, the same kinds of things. So if all the other statistics are the same, okay, if we have the same universities who are accepting undocumented money, who are also accepting money from Jeffrey Epstein, then you would find exactly the same thing.
Oh, no, that's not what I mean. Jeffrey Epstein, for all his flaws, wasn't anti-Israel.
No. That's my point.
No,
This is
right.
exactly my point, because you would find the same thing, even though he wasn't anti-Semitic. That is my point. The same kinds of schools who are accepting who are accepting money and not reporting it are the schools that, if you look at that list, are the same schools that were accepting money, say, from Jeffrey Epstein. So you would have found exactly the same results, and you would have said, oh, Jeffrey Epstein's money is causing anti-Semitism.
Or is causing something else. Yeah,
exactly.
Whatever it is.
We're not saying cause, and the researchers don't say cause. I want to be careful. They're saying it's correlated with, okay? So
they kind of do say cause. They kind of, the title, let's go to the title, because I think this is important. The corruption of the American mind, how concealed foreign funding of U.S. higher education predicts erosion of democratic values and anti-Semitic incidents on camp. That's cause.
Yeah, I mean, well, predicts is, I mean, like, the number of ice cream cones bought predicts, shark attacks, but that doesn't mean that, ice
Then
cream
why mention
causes
it?
sugar. Yeah.
You
Well,
know,
yeah. Yeah. Um, so, so yeah, I think that there's a little bit of, it smacks a little bit of implicit bias. It's like, well, and I would, again, sort of challenge him on this, because you can't have it both. We can't have it both ways, right? Even though we want to have it both ways when we're, but to recognize the hypocrisy there is like, oh, implicit bias has never been found to predict behavior in any research studies. Okay. So the fact that it exists, it's like we can measure implicit bias, but nobody's ever been able to link it to behaviors. So all of a sudden now you're going to say that this implicit bias of having accepted money causes, like now we're linking it to behaviors. Okay,
yeah. I mean,
well,
this is, and you might be right insofar as this link would either be impossible or very hard to do. But this is what's missing. Like, what are they funding? If you are,
I
if you are
don't think
funding,
that would, why would that, but I don't disagree with you, but why would that solve the problem? I think it would add to the data, and it would help us maybe evaluate it, but that would not solve the problem because of this sort of implicit biasy kind of spooky kind of thing where, ooh, the money comes in and anti-Semitism just grows.
right.
It's like
I can answer that
mold.
question. I can answer that question. So for example, the I don't want to say critical social justice because there are versions of critical social justice that are more nuanced than this, but certainly the dumbed down version of critical social justice that is the most impactful out there, right, as measured by things like book sales, holds to a particular worldview wherein a very, very dumbed down version of the oppressors versus oppressed ontology, right? So they would look at a country, and Israel is often the focus of it. So they would look at a country like Israel. They would say that Israel was created artificially. They would say, look,
Who's they?
The people who are advancing the dumbed down version of critical social justice. So people in post-colonial
So we're not
theory,
talking about the funders yet. We're just talking about a random.
We're not talking about the Illuminati
okay.
or anybody. No, I'm talking about people who adhere to the dumbed down version of critical social justice.
Okay.
So the Kennedys of the world, the D'Angelos of the world, pretty much the whole of post-colonial theory as it is right now. If there is
but
an
how
academic,
do you link that to this funding? How do you link them?
I can't yet.
Okay.
But I'll go there. Just give me a second. So we know who they are, right? Specifically, not just wokies. I mean, wokies would not be the kind of critical race theory wokies are kind of adjacent to this, right? This is more like the post-colonial wokies, which is more, it's significant within the United States, but it's more actually a UK thing than it is a US thing. So post-colonial theory is more kind of looking at the legacy of the British Empire and things like that. Yeah, it's significant within the United States too, but it's really, you would say that the most influential form of wokery within the US is critical race theory. Critical race theory is also very influential within the UK, but post-colonial theory is more influential within the UK. So anyway, these people, the post-colonial theorists, do look at universities as being the legacy of the British Empire and upholding the privileges that the empire afforded British people, right? At the expense of other people. They see Israel as being a continuation of that because Israel went directly from British Empire control, right? It was the Palestinian Mandate, the ruled directly from Britain, and then it was given to the Jewish people by the Brits. So it was a direct act of empire power to give them that state. And so they would then look at it and they would say, well, okay, the Palestinians are relatively less well off than the Israelis are. Well, what is the cause of that? Well, it is zero-sum oppression, right? That the Jews in Israel are well off because they are oppressing the Palestinians, and that's what these people actually believe. And so, with that in mind, if you can show and here's the big if, right? Because this isn't shown in this report. If you can show a clear link between funding and those kind of programs or those kinds of academics, then I think you get a lot closer to this kind of anti-Semitism charge, right?
But there isn't that here.
No, there isn't.
Yeah.
So that's
yeah.
And I don't know. So I don't know whether it would be as hard as you suggest to do, by the way. So for example,
well, in this data, I mean, there's nothing in the data that they had access to. There's
right.
nothing there.
No,
and they would have had, and there are hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of schools that they would have, at least 403 schools that they would have had to have researched.
So maybe this is an ask too much. Like, you know, that paper that they put out is interesting in and of itself, right? But what is needed is further research then. I mean, that would be a better way of putting it, right?
Yeah, and I think I would have been happier with the paper if that's how they had concluded, if they had actually said, like, these are hints. And again, you know, like, you have to go a long ways in my mind, you have to go a long ways from, you know, researcher X, lab Y, and, you know, department Z got some funding, you know, to community-wide anti-Semitic hate crimes. That's a leap for me.
Right. So this is something that kind of pisses me off with this. Lee, I love you, and I get on with Lee very well. But this is what pisses me off sometimes with this kind of academic, right? So this kind of academic is often, it's all data, right? It's all objective. It's all, what are the facts, right? We've got anti-Semitism here and we've got funding here. Whereas actually we need that ideological analysis, right? Like, if you show me where the funding is going, I will pick that apart, right? I will be able to show you the link. I will be able to explicitly show you what these people are calling for. Well, no, quite easily. I
also think that it would not have been as hard. Maybe it couldn't have, you know, gone to where you went, but where you're going, but to maybe score these universities on, say, you know, some scale regarding, you know, do they have, for example, you know, do they have a gender studies major? Do they have, you know, these, you know, do they have like a social justice, you know, whatever, how many DEI officers do they have? I don't know, whatever. So they, in theory, maybe they could have, you know, maybe scored the universities on that without relying on, you know, they could have gone to each university's website, kind of done some digging and maybe gotten something. You know,
I would have been more comfortable if they had have said, look, there is a correlation, left it at that, and then ask somebody like us, like, you know, the job that we did with that report. Okay, let's go in and let's look at what they're publishing. This is where the money's going. What are they publishing?
Again, though, I can't get to, even if you get to that, even if you get to anti-Semitic ideas in, you know, a particular pocket, because I think you're going to be hard to not find, you know, because some of this critical social justice stuff is anti-Semitic, and it's pretty much everywhere now. Pretty much everywhere now. It's going to be hard not to find it. Okay, it's almost, you know, it's like, I still don't know how you get to, you know, more hate crimes in the community as a direct link. Again, you know, it's a correlation, but I think that there's, you know, a lot of other things going on
Well, I mean,
that we just can't capture.
It's hard to get to hate crimes because we don't really know what a hate crime is, right?
Exactly. I mean, it's just like a mass murderer. It's like in some places it's like more than 3, in some places it's at least 5, and it's and what kinds of motivations and that kind of thing. So it's defined differently. So not only is it poorly reported, but it's also defined differently in different areas of the country, and they get to choose. They don't even the reporting to the FBI isn't even mandatory. If you don't have, if you don't do it, you don't do it. Like, just,
So I did a bit of digging. Not into the data because that's not my thing. But into Qatari funding. In the UK. So I spoke to some of my contacts at some of the UK's top universities. And yeah, from the point of view of my contacts, the Qataris are deliberately funding critical social justice programs within the UK, within top UK universities, including, and this is worryingly, security studies.
Oh, yeah. I'm not surprised about that. Yeah. I'm not surprised. I mean, yeah.
So let's put it another way. I have to be very careful what I say here. A university department very closely linked with the Ministry of Defence in the UK just uncritically took a lot of money for a project from, let's just say, a Gulf power. It's wild. It's wild that this kind of thing is happening, that universities are... Look, universities influence culture a lot. I think we're comfortable with saying that. Would you be? I think,
Oh, yeah.
and it's wild that these authoritarian regimes, foreign authoritarian regimes, are being able to buy influence within UK and US universities with either no oversight, or in the case that I found, oversight, and the oversight was clapping hands, right. Well done, isn't that lovely?
Right.
This is abjectly terrifying.
Yeah. And here's the thing. I mean, we talk about this all the time, but I don't think universities realize the extent to which they are jeopardizing the influence and the prestige and all that, that they have enjoyed all of this time. They're behind. I really think that I don't want to say most, but many in society are moving away from the respect, the sort of reverence that they have given, given universities, PhDs in general. And this is the kind of thing that's also going to contribute. So now we have massive grade inflation where we have there's nothing predicts high school and college graduation except grade inflation. So we have more high school graduates and more college graduates than ever before in the population. So as a percentage of population, and no other correlate remains significant. The only thing that explains it is grade inflation. So test scores aren't better. High school grades aren't better aren't a better predictor of college grades. They're just better. High school grades are just better. And it's like, so that's one thing. That's undermining, right? The critical social justice stuff, undermining the, respect for universities. This kind of thing, undermining respect for universities. Just even the fact that there was all this undocumented money that then the government asked, and they were like, oh, okay, we'll just report it now because we're above this all anyway. Oops. I mean, you have to be pretty confident that that nobody's going to come knocking if you're, you didn't report it and now you are reporting it. And, did anything bad happen to these universities because of it?
Doesn't seem to be.
No. And so, I don't know what's going on in the higher echelons of universities where they just seem to think that they will continue to enjoy the same level, the same degree of reverence, despite all of this. I just don't know what's going on.
It's alarming. And well, let's look at what we see. So we've kind of like looked at the paper and we said, okay, you've got to, the methodology's fine, you've done a good job, you've sourced it really well, all of that's great. However, the data that you're working with is poor quality,
which, by the way, they did not do a good job of talking about.
Yeah, that's a valid criticism. They should have talked about that. But then that's, somewhat mitigated by the fact that they have such a whopping correlation. And let's go on to the interesting part. What are we actually seeing in our?
Well, yeah. Let me just say, I wouldn't describe the whopping correlation. It's very significant.
Okay.
But we don't typically judge significance by very significant. It either is or it isn't.
Or it isn't.
It's not like, ooh, it's got 3 asterisks by it, so it's very significant. So it's not, I mean, again, we talk about this all the time. It's still not explaining a lot of the variance. Okay, so it's significant, but it's not explaining a lot of it. So,
So this is a kind of problem because what we want to do, or what I want to do, is use this to explain what I'm actually seeing, right?
Right, and that's I think, and it's we get into confirmation bias, right? Because it's like oh, this fits with what we're seeing, so it must be right. Which I see it as sort of a spurious. It's like you found this, but there's a lot of other variables, and I'm not saying that these variables, again, the relationships are significant. These variables are predictive, okay, but I don't think we can get anywhere near causality. I think there's other things going on that are relevant, and so I agree with you. It's like, what does this show us? This shows us that more study is needed. This, I wanted to say something about, because I was in compliance for a long time, so research ethics. And so there's always this ongoing discussion in research ethics about money and, the potential for undue influence and coercion. So it's kind of interesting because, even though we talk about it all the time, there's a lot of problems with it. So generally speaking, the Belmont report, which is something that a lot of compliance officers rely on, say that coercion occurs when an overt threat of harm is presented in order to gain compliance. Okay, so that would be a threat. Undue influence occurs through an offer of excessive, unwanted, inappropriate, or improper reward. Okay, so that's what we would think of as maybe some of this money, right? Would be undue influence. So what's interesting is in this is a person who does a lot of, her name's Largent, does a lot of research on ethics, and so there's people. Although they have this abstract idea of what undue influence is. So, for example, in the study, 79% agreed that payment is an undue influence if the individual perceives no reasonable alternative but to participate. And that's what we would say maybe about a lot of researchers at universities, right? Like, if I don't get money, I'm not going to keep my job. Or if I turn down money, my university is going to say, what the hell? You don't turn down money, right? You know, somebody came, they wanted to give you money. That's the whole Jeffrey Epstein thing, right? He shows up, he hangs out with them, he gives them money. It's like, what are you going to do? You know? But here's an example. So Mary's a resident of a U.S. inner city who was invited to participate in a vaccine study. She said that because she's lost her job and needed money, she felt she had no reasonable alternative but to participate. Only a very few people thought that she was coerced, but 64% thought she was unduly influenced. So so people are seeing in research, they're seeing undue influence. So that's just one example, but there were many. Undue influence was seen a lot more. So we have, in the abstract, we have, people saying that undue influence is this, where you see not an where you don't see an alternative. And then you also see it in the a little bit in the scenarios, but a little bit less. But they're not seeing coercion. So they're seeing undue influence, but they're not seeing coercion. And these are, they're not seeing the threat, but they're seeing the lure, right? The sucking in. And we're constantly dealing with that in ethics. And I'm wondering at these universities, again, if that's a better predictor than where the money comes from in general, just sort of this, there's some undue influence in general going on. And who is, look, I threw this out with Elizabeth Weiss, the anthropologist that I talked to, the podcast that was released about 3 weeks ago, the Bones of Contention one. I said, I have no evidence of this whatsoever. This is just purely anecdotal, but it feels to me like those of us who are sort of pushing back against this critical social justice stuff, pushing back against some of this undue influence, okay, are the people who are more interested in the ethical guidelines, maybe for our field, are more interested in things like academic freedom and free speech, that are more comfortable discussing the nuance and kind of working through something like, is this undue influence? Let's think about, let's not just say yes or no. Let's really dig into it. And the people who are just sort of skimming the surface seem to be the ones who are doing things that we think are nonsensical, right? They're not digging into the sort of ethics and maybe of their fields and stuff. And so I wonder if that's if we could measure that. I'm not saying we can measure that.
Yeah, that's exactly my observation, right? Case in point, I was having another debate with a journalist who is very on the Palestinian side, and the journalist was saying, look, how many people Israel have killed since the beginning of this offensive. Isn't this horrific? And the first thing is, where's your source? What's your source for these deaths? Oh, the Gaza Ministry of Health. Really?
Right.
Now this person is smart. This person is a quite a famous journalist.
And you might use that data, but then you would want to trust but verify, right?
Well, yeah, because that's Hamas, right?
Right, exactly.
It is Hamas, right? So your data is Hamas. Okay, and you're a famous journalist. And if somebody was making the argument from the other end, like, so for example, Israel said only, the Israeli Ministry of Health says only 10 people have been killed. Then they would be the first to say, yeah, but that's Israel. Israel's saying that. Well, right. You can't apply these standards to yourself. So people aren't thinking these ideas through.
Right.
Right.
And so if you have places that are not thinking some of these things through already. Maybe they're, sort of not thinking about things like undue influence as deeply as they should be. They're, as evidenced by, taking money from, places where maybe they shouldn't take money. Are those people that are already or are more vulnerable to this critical social justice, which is in itself anti-Semitic? And so is that really what's going? Is it not just the money? Is the money a sign, a proxy for what's already going on?
So let's unpack this a little bit more. So I don't want to say that these people can't think things through, because they
Oh, me
can.
neither. No.
Key thing is, what they don't do is they don't think it through if thinking it through would cost them something.
Mm-hmm. Exactly.
Right.
Yeah.
So, same person I was debating with, I said to him, look, forget whether these statistics are being inflated or not, right? Let's just say that they're real. Hamas boast about openly, and here's a series of YouTube links where you can actually see the leaders outwardly, openly just saying exactly this repeatedly, emphatically and clearly, that they hope that their civilians die because in so doing they are fast-tracked to heaven, and so that's great for their civilians if they die, right? So they basically pretty much openly say that they use civilians as human shields. So now when you then go on and you criticize Israel for causing collateral damage and civilians dying, question number one, who is more responsible for the deaths of those civilians? Is it the Israelis, who didn't want to kill them, or Hamas, who deliberately put them in harm's way? Right? So who, the classic example would be like, if I rounded up a bunch of people, forced them on at gunpoint onto a busy highway, shot any that tried to escape, and then Elizabeth Spivak runs over one of them by accident in her car, who is more responsible, me or Elizabeth Spivak? You'd clearly say it was me, right? But that's not even it either, right? It's like, by going along, by saying that it's Israel that is the agent here, that is the most responsible for the deaths of these civilians, you are then incentivizing Hamas to use even more human shields and get even more of their people killed. So you're actually harming the very people that you're claiming to stand up for. And none of this is difficult to get. None of this is,
but
they don't get
right,
it. So why is it that they didn't get
or
it?
they do get it, and they, like you said, they could get it, but
They
they're not
could get
motivated.
it, but they're not motivated to. And so this is this is what is happening. There are, and look, let's be fair. To an extent, we all do this, right? But we're kind of I think some people are more motivated than others to hold
Right.
themselves in check.
Yeah.
Now,
Yeah.
and if I,
and this is where, well, I was just going to say, this is where religion, and we often talk about, so where religion kind of comes in terms of giving us guidance and rules, and sometimes religion gives us less to think about, right? Because there's rules, and we just do what's told, and this idea that critical social justice is somewhat of a religion, right? And so there's certain rules. It's like, this is how we're going to do it. And many times religious scholars, or people who are who maybe love their religion enough to really do the research and study religion, do know the origins. They don't just follow the rules, they know the origins. And I think, you're right. Like, so many of these people who are just sort of like following along with critical social justice don't know their own sources. They don't know their own literature. And they're just continue to dig the hole.
Well, yeah, because it benefits them. It benefits them in the short term, right?
Yes, in the short term.
We go back to this kind of adaptive maladaptive argument. So if you're in a university, does it make sense to go along with this stuff? Yeah, in your short-term
Yeah,
interests.
right. But it's certainly not in the interests of the university.
No,
In the long term,
and
it is
possibly
most
not
certainly
your long-term interests either.
and not for the students at all.
No, it's awful.
And so when it's not good for the university and it's not good for the students, it's also not good for, for us in the long term either. So, but you're right. It's just the short term. There's the short term pain of being canceled, of being ostracized, and that kind of stuff is just too much, I guess, for most people.
I mean, if you look at the ethics of what happened to you, that was wildly unethical.
And it's not in the past tense. It's one of the things I'm always like correct, and I have to correct myself on too, because it's like, wait a minute, right. This is still current. This is still, it's still happening, right? So I wanted to talk about another little study because it is about money. This is in the Journal of Gambling Issues. So of an interesting.
That's like the one issue that I don't have. I have plenty of vices. Yeah.
Like lots of them, but not that one.
But no, it's left me stone dead. It's just like completely uninterested in gambling.
Not attracted to you.
No.
Okay, so this is this study was done in Canada. They tracked it's part of another study. They offered people money to fill out a survey about gambling. Okay, about their gambling habits, and so they used what's called the Canadian Problem Gambling Index to measure and to divide people into people who were problem gamblers and people who were not. Okay. And everybody got compensated for participating in the study. So they got 15 Canadian dollars for filling out the survey. So this is so interesting to me. They tracked when people cashed their check. And they found that people who had a gambling problem cashed their check 2 days earlier than people who didn't have a gambling problem. Now, again, this sort of gets back to my sort of this idea, like it's just as easy to fall in love with a rich man, right? It's the same amount of money. It's the same amount of love, right? Let's just fall in love with somebody that's got money. When you're talking about research, it's like if you are motivated, if you're driven to, by money, for your research, right? I mean, it is a bit of an addiction, this research situation it drives everything. I don't think people who aren't in academia don't really understand the extent to which, it really is the driver of everything. Then, you're after the money, right? And you cash your check 2 days sooner. Now you might say, oh, 2 days, big deal. But, it's just a simple survey and a simple, reward check that everybody got. So I think that impulse to take the money, to do that short term, to get that short term reward. Don't ask too many questions. Just do it. That's why I saw that connection from what you were just saying.
Yeah. So from my perspective, is this happening? Are the Chinese government and the Qatari government buying influence in US universities and UK? And this paper doesn't say anything about the UK. Right, so academic hat on, you'd have to say, I can't answer that question, right?
But it makes intuitive sense to you.
It makes intuitive sense.
Mm-hmm.
But also it backs up like what I've heard from academics themselves at some of the UK's most prestigious universities who have told me.
Well, you know what I wonder though, because again, the research shows that most people who get funding, who get, whether it's within, again, to go back to my compliance examples, whether it's in a research study and people get, they're getting paid for research or not getting paid for research, or they randomly assign people to get either nothing, say $100 or $300. And they pay the $300 people will say, I didn't do it for the money. Right. And I did it for the research. The money was nice. Okay. They'll say things like, well, who wouldn't want to receive money? Just for doing what I was already going to do. So, I'm using an example of like a step tracker thing, so when early on they were seeing, is this really going to help people lose weight? And so it's like, oh, well, I didn't do it for the money. I did it to contribute to research. So I don't know that researchers who say that it either is going on or isn't going on, I don't know if we're very good at knowing whether research is influencing us or not.
Who's funding us, Elizabeth?
Not anyone. Damn it.
No. But it seriously raises a question, doesn't it? If you are doing what we're doing, which is essentially trying to hold Western civilization together. I'm not saying we're being effective or not in that regard, but that's what we'd like to do, right? So before you accuse us of being hyperbolic, we're not saying we are doing that. We're trying to do that. The hyperbolic
we're desperately clinging to threads,
attempting to and maybe failing. But how come it is so easy to get all of this woke nonsense funded? Because you are looking at ideological stuff that is suboptimal. No, it's awful, right? Like some of the research that's being published is awful, and some of the good quality research, like we've gone through psychological papers in which the quality of research in terms of the methodology and everything is fine, but it doesn't support the claims that are being made, right? That's been one of the themes that we found. So how is it that it is so easy to get that kind of crap out there, and yet the better arguments hardly get any airtime at all, even though the public are quite receptive to them?
So before we were so rudely interrupted by an internet
outage,
an internet hiccup there. I was just saying, I'm not really sure we're very good at knowing whether we're being influenced by money or not. And you were saying that you are hearing maybe that, hearing people say that they believe that they see it. Now, maybe not in themselves. Maybe we're better at accusing others of it than we are knowing whether it's happening to us.
I think that standards of evidence is a really, really hard thing, because you want a certain standard of evidence to make an academic claim, which is why they're not making any specific claims. They're kind of nudge, nudge, wink, wink in the paper, right? They're not saying outright that Qatar is deliberately trying to corrupt US education. That is what they're saying, but they're not saying it outright because they know that the standards of evidence just aren't there yet. And yet, if you're in the policy business, if you're looking at, if you're working for an intelligence agency, or if you are in consulting government or working in government to make a decision on, which way are we going to go policy-wise, then it's nice if you have the academic standard of evidence, but you really can't wait for that. You have to make decisions based on a much lower standard of evidence, and as you do in your everyday life, right?
Right.
You can't sit down. Okay, am I going to choose the blue pen or the black pen to write the birthday card? Well, how would this go across? Let's wait for a study to find out what the chances are of X person receiving a card written in this ink better than that ink. You just have to go. We all have to operate on much lower standards of evidence. That includes governments. So, this is an academic paper, and they have to write it in an academic way so that they cannot openly conclude that Qatar is deliberately using their money to cause anti-Israel and anti-Semitic. They're more concerned about Israel, I think, than the Jews, but, the two are kind of inexorably linked in most people's minds. Are Qatar deliberately using their money to cause anti-Israeli sentiment on campus, right? Knowing that, for example, Qatar does fund Hamas and houses a lot of its leaders in, mind-bogglingly opulent mansions. So are they using that money to those ends? As academics, we can't say yes, right?
Well, and I'm not willing. I mean, I'm sort of suggesting this. It's a little bit conspiracy theory, a little bit, a little bit too, implicit biasy for me.
For
But
you,
I'm willing to entertain your, I'm willing to hear you out.
But again, if you're in the business of intelligence, then you don't have the time to wait around for that evidence to become available, for it to become as crystal clear as that. Again, you'd like it to be that way, but you have to make a decision. Otherwise, lives could be lost, right? Otherwise, you could have a major terrorist event or something like that. Or, how long would it take for us to... So let's assume Qatar are doing that, right? How long do you think it would take for us to gather enough evidence to publish a report that would conclusively say that that's what's going on?
Oh, I'm not suggesting they shouldn't have published this. I'm not suggesting that at all.
No, that's not the question I'm saying. Of course, I get where you're coming from, right? But what I'm saying is, let's say that Qatar have made a policy, a secret policy, that they are going to use their significant amounts of wealth in order to deliberately influence US colleges and thereby, hopefully, the rest of American society to be against Israel. How much... Now, from an academic point of view, how would we get the evidence that we would need in order to publish that? Could we ever get there?
I mean, maybe, but it would be pretty tough. Yeah.
Right.
It
would be really tough. Yeah. But if that is what they're up to, then we do need to lower the standards of evidence in order to get a conviction.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's perfectly fine to consider this. Again, the way that I would consider, I don't want to reject out of hand everything that smacks of a potential conspiracy theory. I don't want to just say, oh, well, it sounds like it's conspiracy theory, so it can't be true. I mean, just because
some conspiracies are true, right?
Exactly. So I'm not, but this does have that sort of like, it seems like a really long way around to influence. I mean, I'm sorry, but I get it that you're not going to agree with me, but I think this is a pretty long game. Let me say this. I don't think that idea is that far off of grooming children to be gay. And let me tell you why. Because by the time, let's say I'm grooming children to be gay, by the time that child is grown up and participating in, same-sex relationships or, deciding to be trans or whatever, I'm dead. So it's like this idea that's like, oh, let's play this really long game so that in 50 or 100 years, there's going to be enough people who believe this in order to influence international politics. It's just a little...
Right. Well, you know that I agree with you about the gay grooming thing, right? Which is why but the example doesn't work, right? Because in order for the gay grooming thing to be true, it would need so many participants in it, right? There'd need to be so many people who are clued into this conspiracy theory or going along. No, not at all. It would need a handful of people. Like who is controlling Qatar's sovereign wealth fund?
No. I mean, in the U.S., over here, it would need an awfully lot of people to come over to the critical justice and to start engaging in hate crimes. I mean, come on.
No. All they would have to do is find scholars who are already publishing in critical social justice. They're not creating a new movement. They're finding a movement that exists and funding it. This is what the Soviets have done since time immemorial, right?
In order to spread hate crimes?
Well, right. So we know this because this is all being declassified now, both from a Russian point of view and an American point of view. But the Russians, since time immemorial, the Soviet intelligence plan was to look for existing cleavages within US society and try and drive a wedge in them. And they still do that, right? We know that the Russians do that. We have evidence that they do that, like in terms of them pushing narratives around Black Lives Matter, in terms of them putting, at the same time, driving the MAGA narrative as well. We can track the IP addresses to them doing that.
But wouldn't that be more to disrupt
Yes,
democracy? So this is a whole different argument. This is in order that there at some point in the future there will be more people committing hate crimes in
they don't care about the hate crimes. Qatar is not trying to cause hate crimes. In fact, if you were to talk to the emir of Qatar and say,
so now you're talking beyond the article then.
Right. What I'm saying is that the kind of hate crimes and the anti-Semitism that's coming out on campus is a side effect. It's not the desired effect, right? I don't think that they mean to do this. I don't think that they care whether they're doing it or not. I don't think they're bothered one way or the other, right? What they want to do is undermine Israel's influence within the region. That's what they want to do.
Okay,
right?
So I might buy that more, because I thought you were sort of arguing that they were trying to get people to engage in hate crimes because that would somehow advance.
No, I don't think they care. I
was sticking too closely to the article.
Okay, look, from their point of view, they're going to probably think, look, if people are going around beating up Jews, if that undermines Israel's position within the region, that's a good thing. But we don't care about the Jews being beaten up one way or the other, right?
Right.
I don't think that they think that the Jews are subhuman or anything like that. But again, if people are making that case and that harms Israel's position within the region, then that's a good thing. What we do know about Qatar, we know that they're funding these universities. We know that they host Hamas. The Hamas leadership lives in Doha. Again, funded by the Qatari government to millions upon millions, if not billions of dollars. We know that they fund Hamas. All of this is objectively true, right? We know that Qatar is trying to become more relevant. So on the one hand, Qatar hosts the biggest US military base in the Middle East, whilst on the other having open links with Al-Qaeda, with, again, Hamas. They host the leaders of Hamas and the biggest US military base, which tells you something, right? We know that there is tension between Qatar and their big rivals, and we know who their big regional rivals are. Elizabeth?
Oh no, this is a test.
Listening last time?
This is a test.
Saudi Arabia.
That was going to be my guess, but I was afraid.
Saudi Arabia hosts Mecca and Medina, which are the two most important cities in Islam, right? So they are the preeminent power. But the Saudi royal family, they're merchants a few generations back. They're not like this kind of super storied family. And so, people like Iran and Qatar being a Sunni power, Iran being a Shia power, are kind of pissed off with Saudi Arabia. They don't want Saudi Arabia to be the preeminent Islamic power in the region, especially now that Saudi Arabia seem to be kind of edging away from Islam, right? They're becoming more and more secular. Now, they're still very theocratic by Western standards, but they very much are liberalizing at quite an extraordinary pace. And the Saudis want to be friends with the Israelis. So Qatar, are Qatar trying to undermine Israel? Absolutely. I don't think there's anybody in foreign policy who would argue otherwise. They'll do dealings with Israel. They're trying to do dealings between Hamas and Israel in order to get the hostages released. But again, they're doing that because they want to preserve Hamas's continuity. They want to keep them there. They're worried that if there is no deal for the hostages, Israel will go in and wipe Hamas out. And they don't want that because they have a lot of influence over Hamas, as do Iran. So why then would Qatar putting all of this money into US universities? Why would they be doing that? And again, look, there are pieces of the jigsaw puzzle that are missing. As I suggested, I want to know, well, what programs are these going to? And then I want to look at those programs and analyze them from an ideological point of view. And I don't have that yet. But if I have to make a decision on this, why are Qatar putting so much money into these universities? And we see a correlation between a rise in anti-Semitic hate crimes, then my guess would be that Qatar are putting money into these programs to fund decolonial, specifically ideological programs, in order to weaken support for Israel within the United States. And they've been quite successful in that.
So again,
you're saying, like, is this we'll see 10 years down the line or in the future? No, we can see this now. Right?
I'm just saying that this is well beyond, though.
It's not your thing, but that's fine.
No. It's also well beyond the article, I guess, is my point. So, like, we agree that the article is,
limited.
Yeah. And so it opened this discussion, which is valuable. So and maybe we'll drive.
Here's another problem with the article, like, because it's, you got Anti-Defamation League people in there, and people who I like and I'm very sympathetic with. Again, I'm very pro-Israel, and I'm very worried about the obvious levels of anti-Semitism that you can just see anywhere right now, right? But if you want data on that, that's there too, right? There are, the rise in anti-Semitic hate crimes even before the 7th is well documented. So, Joel, Lee, if you're listening, I'm very, 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 very sympathetic with you. But I think that the interests of these people may be to tie this directly to rises of anti-Semitism in the United States. And while I agree that there is a cause and effect relationship in all likelihood, from an academic point of view, you're right. You can't really show that. What I think you can show better, and I wish they'd gone down this route, is that the money by Qatar is being used, forget about the anti-Semitism, it is being used. The purpose is to undermine Israel's role in the Middle East. And that in and of itself might not be anti-Semitic. You might just be because you don't like Israel or you want some other power to be in. It doesn't mean that you hate the Jews. But that's what's going on here, I think. I think that's what the balance, if you have to say, what is this money being used to do, then I think that's the best call. The other alternatives being it's genuinely being used to combat homophobia. No. It's been given away because out of the kindness of their hearts. No. It has a design, and that design is the most likely explanation for that design is one that is most congruent with Qatar's foreign policy. And I've explained what that foreign policy is. It's to undermine the effectiveness of Israel and Saudi Arabia. So that's what's going on, I think. But again, in order to state that, I have to drop the standard of evidence a bit. And it's necessary sometimes to drop the standard of evidence if you're trying to combat a potentially hostile regime, which this is. And the US really should stop being so friendly with Qatar.
And just accepting money without any questions, whether it's from Jeffrey
anybody.
Epstein, whether it's from Jeffrey Epstein or China or Qatar or whoever.
Well, here's another thing that wasn't being discussed. There's number one was Qatar, number two was China.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Now, what are they up to? Well, we know that they also are interested in, certainly in the United States, breaking away from its role as the
and
global
this is
hegemon.
One thing I did learn from last week, which is that you pointed out that really, although China would like to start to be more influential, they have some interests. They're not particularly effective right now in that region, and so other more circuitous routes might be they might be using more circuitous routes, I guess, because they're not that effective in
No.
that.
So, I mean, China are really
But they
like,
might like to influence things.
well, they're in China are in a really bad predicament because their leadership, Xi Jinping, is completely deluded, and he has purged anybody who will tell him the truth. You know, so anybody who tells him something he doesn't want to hear, like we've got floods here, or the flooding is worse than expected, or whatever, and that person will be gone, imprisoned, executed, fired, whatever. They'll be done. So there is nobody. Xi Jinping has less access, probably, to reliable information on what's happening in China than you do. I mean, that's how severe it is within China, right? So, you know, China used to have effective intelligence agencies that were pretty good, not anymore. And even if there are effective people within those intelligence agencies and they have the means to gain intelligence, they're not able to communicate that to the leadership because, again, the leadership only wants to hear what the leadership wants to hear. Qatar doesn't seem to have that problem. Now, I have no idea of the decision-making structure within Qatar, but they're being very, very effective, in my view, in spreading propaganda against Israel. And that's what I think that this is. I think that that's the most likely explanation for this funding, is to try and weaken
Well, I guess
US support for Israel.
We will await the next, the follow-up project with bated breath.
Yeah, I mean,
I'm sure there'll be one.
yeah, I mean, I don't know. The West really needs to get its act together. Even if you reject the conclusions that I've come to here, and I think that the balance of evidence would seem to suggest that this is the most likely explanation, but you know, even if you reject it, you should not be letting foreign regimes buy influence in universities in the UK and the US. You are asking for trouble.
And we are definitely not, it is definitely not helping us dig ourselves out of the hole that we are in.
No.
So, no.
You know, we're in the middle of a deep, deep, deep cultural malaise.
Yes.
And there are people who would like for it to get worse.
Yes. And this ain't helping.
No. And on that cheery note, thank you very much. And we will speak next week.